They say a man never forgets the exact moment his world stops spinning, and for me, that moment came on a regular Tuesday night in April, when the sunset bled gold across the kitchen blinds and the air inside our home hung still too still, like the quiet before a bomb goes off. I remember setting down my thermos on the counter, the faint clink of steel against granite echoing far louder than it should have, and there she was, Julie, sitting at our kitchen table in a deep maroon dress that she hadn't worn in years, her face carefully painted, lips cherry red, her hair pinned up like we were heading to some gala I hadn't been invited to. She had a glass of red wine in her hand and a look in her eyes I hadn't seen in over a decade, equal parts guilt and thrill, like she'd already done something terrible and was about to justify it in a way that would make her feel less like a monster. I stood there for a moment, still wearing my work boots caked in drywall dust and Kentucky clay, sweat drying on the back of my neck from spending 12 hours finishing a porch for a widow out in Harrodsburg, and I had the nerve to smile at her, thinking maybe she'd planned a surprise for our anniversary, even though it was still 2 months away. But then she said it, softly, like it was reasonable, like we were having just another Tuesday night conversation. I think I want to date other men. That was it. Just 7 words that shattered 24 years of marriage in less than a breath. She said it like she was announcing she was going vegan, or trying a new hobby, like it was just some small detour on the road we'd been walking together since we were both kids. And then, while I stood frozen in the doorway, she leaned back in her chair, sipped her wine, and smiled, like I was supposed to understand, maybe even support her. Like the man who built her a life from nothing should now hold the door open so she could go screw strangers with a clean conscience. At first, I thought I'd misheard her, that maybe she was trying to make a bad joke, or maybe she'd had too much to drink. God knows she never used to touch the bottle before dinner, but the look on her face told me she was dead serious. And that realization sent a slow, creeping burn through my chest, like someone had taken a welding torch to my ribs and pressed it in, inch by inch. And I'll tell you the part that really broke me, it wasn't the betrayal, not at first, or even the absurdity of it all. It was that she looked happy, like she was excited to leave. Like this had been planned for months, and I was the only fool still clinging to a story that had already ended in her head. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. Hell, I didn't even blink. I just reached for the bottle of bourbon I kept under the sink, poured myself a finger, and sat down across from the woman I no longer recognized, wondering how the hell you're supposed to respond when your wife tells you she wants to cheat, but only a little. There's a certain kind of silence that hits you right before your heart breaks, not the kind where the world goes quiet, but the kind where you go quiet, where even your thoughts stop mid-sentence because nothing your brain can come up with is worse than what your gut already knows to be true. I sat across from Julie at that old oak table I built with my own 2 hands back in '98, the same one we'd shared 100 holiday dinners around. The same one where she used to fold our kids' baby clothes and drink her coffee in the mornings while watching birds on the porch, and I swear to God, I barely recognized her. Her words were still hanging in the air, almost echoing in my head like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. I think I want to date other men. I didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or throw the damn table through the wall, so instead, I just sat there, staring at the woman I thought I knew, trying to make sense of what in God's name had happened to her, to us, and realizing, with a kind of sickening clarity, that this wasn't just about a little fun. No, this was a premeditated detonation of everything we'd built together. The crazy part? She wasn't even angry. She wasn't crying or begging or lashing out like someone racked with guilt. No, she was calm, almost relieved, like this conversation had been rehearsed in her head 100 times before I walked through the door, like she'd already lived through the worst part, and now just had to sit back and watch the fallout. I asked her, flat out, "Julie, are you seeing someone already?" She didn't blink, didn't even hesitate. "Not yet," she said, swirling her wine like this was a girl's brunch, and not the total destruction of a 24-year marriage, "but I've had some offers." And just like that, something inside me shifted. Not rage, not yet. It was more like a cold awareness settling over my bones, like a fog lifting to reveal a battlefield I didn't know I'd been walking through for years. Because you don't just wake up one day and decide to cheat on your husband unless the groundwork's been laid for a while, unless the seeds were already planted. Flirtations at work, late-night text messages to old friends, excuses wrapped in just enough truth to sound harmless. I didn't say another word to her that night. I didn't scream or demand answers, or try to guilt her with memories of our wedding day, or the babies we held together, or the mortgage we bled over for 20 years. I just stood up, walked to the sink, poured the rest of my bourbon down the drain. Not because I was done drinking, but because I knew I'd need something stronger than whiskey to get through what was coming. And I walked out the back door into the cold Kentucky air. I sat on that old swing my kids used to fight over, staring up at a sky that looked exactly the same as it did yesterday, even though everything beneath it had changed. That's when it hit me. I wasn't in a marriage anymore. I was in a performance, one she had clearly stopped auditioning for a long, long time ago. The thing they never tell you about betrayal is how quiet it is in the beginning. How it doesn't kick the door down or leave bloodstains on the carpet right away, but instead, it slips in like fog under the frame, reshaping everything slowly, silently, until one morning you wake up in your own home and realize you're living in someone else's story. That week, after Julie's little declaration over dinner, I started noticing the cracks in places I'd never thought to look before. Little absences that once blended into the background of daily life, but now felt sharp and intentional, like pieces of a puzzle she hoped I'd never have the time or willpower to finish. Her late-night walks, the sudden surge of unreadable texts on her phone, and the way she'd hum to herself getting ready. Not in the happy, innocent way she used to, but like someone performing happiness. All of it suddenly made sense in the most gut-punching way possible. She stopped wearing her wedding ring. Not dramatically, not with some fight or speech, but just forgot it one morning. And then the next. And then it was gone. No tan line. No apology. Like it had never existed in the first place. She started dressing differently too. Not sloppy, not seductive either, but calculated. Intentional. Like every outfit had an audience. But that audience sure as hell wasn't me. I remember watching her from the hallway one evening, her back to me as she stood at the mirror adjusting a blouse I hadn't seen in years, touching up lipstick before heading out to catch up with the girls, and I realized with a kind of sick irony that I didn't even ask who she was meeting anymore. Not because I didn't care, but because I knew whatever answer I'd get would be clean, polished, and 100% fiction. She was lying to me now, not like a desperate woman caught in a mistake, but like someone who had already rehearsed the story she'd use when I finally confronted her. And that kind of lie. That's the kind that stabs slow and deep. I didn't tell anyone what was happening. Not my brother, not the guys at work, not even our grown daughter who'd moved out a year earlier. Because the shame of it was too fresh, too raw. And the truth is, I still hadn't fully accepted that my wife was willingly becoming someone else right in front of me. And there I was, just watching it happen. But while she was slipping into this shiny new persona, I started doing something of my own. Collecting, storing, remembering. I paid attention. I noticed the new cologne on her when she came home late. I saw the Uber receipts in the trash can when she claimed to be driving herself. I took pictures of her phone screen reflection in the microwave when she was distracted. I wasn't just some old fool being dragged along for the ride anymore. No, I was awake now. And what she didn't know was that while she was dating other men, I was falling in love with something else entirely, the truth. And the truth, as I was about to find out, had teeth. There are moments in a man's life where time seems to stop. Not in the poetic, life-affirming sense, but in the brutal, slow-motion way that only happens when you witness something that rips the last thread of denial clean out of your chest. It was a Saturday morning when it happened, early spring, the kind of morning where the air still bites a little but the sunlight makes promises it doesn't keep, and I had decided to head into work despite it being my day off. That's what she thought anyway. What Julie didn't know was that I had parked my old Chevy Silverado around the corner 2 streets away, tucked behind the community pool building, where no one ever looks unless they're either 14 or up to no good. I walked the last half block on foot, slow and deliberate, boots crunching gravel, heart pounding in a way that reminded me of the night I thought we were losing our daughter in the ER years ago. Except this time, it wasn't fear I was feeling. It was certainty. From the moment I saw that unfamiliar black Dodge Charger sitting in my driveway, angled like it had been parked by someone with confidence, someone who thought they belonged, I knew. The car was sleek, almost aggressively so, like the kind of vehicle a man drives when he's compensating for something or trying to prove he still has it. There were 2 coffee cups on the dash, one with lipstick on the rim, the exact same deep red shade I'd scraped off Julie's wine glass 3 nights earlier. I stood there for a second, just watching it. The front curtains were drawn, which they never were, but the faint glow of movement flickered behind the sheer panel on the side window. I didn't storm in. I didn't bang on the door. I just waited. And then, like a bad scene from a movie I never wanted to be cast in, I saw them. She opened the door. He stepped out first, tall, broad-shouldered, probably 10 years younger than me. And then Julie followed, hair slightly messy, barefoot, laughing like a girl on prom night. No guilt. No hesitation. Just joy. Joy. I didn't breathe for a long moment. I just took out my phone, held it steady, and hit record. I captured every frame, every smirk, every lingering glance between them as they stood by his car and kissed in my driveway, like teenagers who owned the world. And that was the moment something inside me hardened, froze into a shape I didn't recognize but welcomed with open arms. I wasn't sad anymore. I wasn't confused. No more pacing the hallways, wondering if I was imagining things. No more pretending not to see the signs. I had my proof now, undeniable and high definition. What she didn't realize was that while she was busy playing dress-up in someone else's fantasy, I had just become something far more dangerous than a broken man. I had become silent. And silence, when backed by evidence and intent, can be the loudest sound in the world. There's a strange kind of power that comes with knowing the truth, but choosing, deliberately, not to reveal it right away. Like holding a live grenade with the pin already pulled, fully aware that everyone else in the room has no idea they're about 3 seconds from impact. After I filmed Julie and her muscle-bound boy toy kissing in the driveway I paid for, outside the house I built with my own hands, I didn't march in and confront her with the rage she probably expected. No. Instead, I walked back to my truck, slid the phone into the glove box, and just sat there in the driver's seat, engine off, as a silence so heavy settled over me, I swear I could feel it pressing against my ribs. That silence didn't come from defeat or heartbreak anymore. It came from clarity. I wasn't confused. I wasn't spiraling. I knew exactly what she was now. And more importantly, I knew what I had to become. Over the next few days, I played the role she had written for me. The dull, oblivious husband too tired, too numb, or too simple to notice his wife wasn't just slipping away. She had already left. I kissed her on the cheek before work like nothing had changed. I complimented her dinners, the ones she barely cooked anymore, and I even laughed politely at her small talk, all while documenting everything. Uber logs, phone bills, security cam footage, even a receipt I found tucked in her purse from some trendy little rooftop bar 2 counties over, the kind of place she used to mock for being full of phonies trying too hard. It was like she was trying on someone else's skin, and the deeper she sunk into her fantasy world, the more brazen she became. What she didn't realize, and this was the part that honestly made me want to laugh sometimes, was that by underestimating me, she handed me every tool I'd need to bury her with a smile on my face. But the real shift, the true turning point, came one night when she stumbled in past midnight, cheeks flushed and hair tousled like she'd been dancing through someone else's evening, and she looked at me with those eyes, glossy, unfocused, and smug, like she was daring me to say something, to challenge her, to beg her to stop. And I almost did. For half a second, the old me rose up, the man who once thought a broken vow could still be patched with time and grace. But then, as she said it, she looked me dead in the face and said, "You're such a good man, Michael. I'm glad you understand that this is just what I need right now." What she needed. As if I were just a patient bystander while she tested new lovers like shoes at a damn outlet store. And that was the moment, right there, where any trace of mercy inside me dried up like dust. I nodded, smiled, and kissed her forehead, and in my mind, I started the clock. Because now it wasn't just about surviving her betrayal, it was about making sure she remembered it for the rest of her life. There's a moment in every betrayal story when the lies stop trying to hide and start dancing right in front of you, bold, barefaced, and shameless. And the only thing more painful than watching it unfold is realizing they want you to see it, just to test how far you'll bend before you break. For me, that moment came one weekend in early June, when our niece got married at a beautiful vineyard about 40 minutes out of town. Now, I wasn't planning on going, not because I didn't care, but because Julie had told me it was more her side of the family, and she didn't want things to be awkward if I came. I nodded, pretended to agree, even helped her pick out the damn dress, knowing full well I wouldn't be sitting at home watching baseball that night. No, sir. I already had a plan, one that involved a burner Instagram account, a few quiet messages to her cousin Hannah, who, bless her heart, always had a conscience, and a phone screen that would light up with something I never expected and yet somehow had known was coming all along. When the first video came through, a 15-second clip of Julie, standing out on the dance floor in her backless emerald dress, slow dancing with the same man who'd parked in our driveway just 2 weeks earlier. I swear my breath caught somewhere between my chest and my throat, like my body couldn't decide whether to laugh or collapse. But it wasn't just the dance. It was the way she looked at him. The way her hand rested on his chest like it belonged there. The way she tilted her head back and laughed when he whispered something in her ear. It was all wrong, not just the betrayal, but the comfort, the ease, the practice behind it. This wasn't a fling. This was a routine. Something that had been going on for far longer than she'd ever admit. In the next clip, they toasted with champagne flutes at the head table, my wife and her boyfriend sitting beside her family like he'd already been welcomed in, while I was left behind like an old piece of furniture no one had the guts to haul out. But here's where the universe played its cruelest joke, or maybe its finest setup. As I sat in my truck watching those videos on loop, my phone buzzed with a message from Julie herself. "Hope you're relaxing today, babe. Wedding sweet. Wish you were here." That was it. A lie so casual it could have been mistaken for love. That text, paired with the footage I had just seen, didn't ignite fury in me like you might expect. No, it created something worse. A stillness. A calm so cold and controlled, it made me realize I wasn't hurt anymore. I was done. I was finished mourning what we had. I wasn't waiting for an apology, a confession, or a final straw, because that wedding video was the final straw. I didn't reply to her message. I just sat there in the silence, lit a cigarette I hadn't touched in 10 years, and made a silent vow to myself. If she was so eager to put on a show for everyone else, then I'd give her a stage. But this time, I would be writing the script. Every man has a limit, a quiet line drawn in his mind where dignity ends and fire begins, and once it's crossed, there's no crawling back to who you were before. That line was behind me now, a mile wide and burning, and the strange thing was, I felt calm for the first time in months. There was no screaming, no desperate need to confront her or slam doors or cry into a bottle. Instead, I had something far more dangerous on my side, a plan. The kind of plan that doesn't get built overnight, but brick by brick, with cold hands and a steady heart. If Julie wanted an audience for her fantasy, if she had so much pride in what she was doing, then I was going to give her a show she'd never forget, one with lights, guests, and a final act so sharp it would slice through every smug look she ever gave me. All I needed was one date, one event that meant something to both of us. And as fate would have it, our anniversary was less than 2 weeks away. I told her I wanted to do something simple, a backyard barbecue. Nothing fancy, just some family, a few friends, maybe a fire pit and some ribs. The kind of thing that would make me look like the clueless, sentimental sap she still believed I was. She smiled like she was humoring a child, kissed me on the cheek, and said, "That actually sounds sweet." What she didn't realize was that by agreeing, she signed her own invitation to Judgment Day. I spent the next week preparing like it was war. I printed photos. I pulled videos from the cloud. I cataloged dates, receipts, timestamps, even matched a lipstick stain on a whiskey glass to the same shade her side piece had posted about gifting her on his Instagram story. I wasn't sloppy. I wasn't bitter. I was methodical. Even the playlist I put together for the evening was laced with meaning, love songs that turned sour halfway through, lyrics that cut deeper if you actually listened. She wouldn't notice, but others would. The day of the barbecue, the sun came out early, almost like it knew something was coming, and by 5 o'clock the backyard was buzzing with laughter, folding chairs, and the scent of smoked meat and betrayal. Her parents were there. My sister. Our daughter. Even her favorite coworkers, the ones she bragged to about how understanding Michael is. I played the perfect host, flipping burgers, topping off drinks, smiling like a man who had no idea he was living in the shadow of a lie. And then, once the sky turned orange and everyone had a plate in hand, I wheeled out the projector, said I'd made a little video for our anniversary. She looked confused, then touched, probably expecting some sentimental slideshow of our wedding or old family vacations. But what lit up that screen was something else entirely. A timeline. A truth. Clip after clip of her and her boyfriend. Kisses. Hand-holding. Hotel timestamps. Text screenshots. All of it. Silence fell so hard I could feel it shake the grass beneath my boots. She didn't speak. Her face went white. And I just stood there, hands in my pockets, watching the woman I once loved fall apart in front of the people who once loved her too. There's a particular silence that follows a truth bomb like that. Not the kind of silence filled with tension or confusion, but the heavy, suffocating kind where shame crawls into every corner of a room and sticks to the walls like smoke. After the final video clip faded off the screen, Julie sitting half-dressed at a motel patio, drinking wine from a plastic cup while her lover snapped selfies with her toes in his lap. No one said a word. Not a fork clinked against a plate. Not a chair shifted. Not even a cough. It was as if the entire backyard, the people, the food, even the birds overhead, had frozen in place to process what they had just seen. Julie stood like a statue, the blood drained from her face, her hands clenched around the hem of her dress like she was trying to keep herself from falling apart. And I'll be honest with you, in that moment, I felt nothing for her. No anger. No regret. No love. Just a strange sense of justice, like I had finally set the balance right after months of pretending the world hadn't turned upside down. Her father was the first to speak, and I'll never forget the sound of his voice, not because he yelled, but because of how quietly he said it, like the kind of disappointment that comes from the soul. I don't even know who you are anymore. That man helped me build our porch with his own 2 hands when Julie and I first got married. He gave us his blessing, called me the son he never had, and now he looked at his own daughter like she was a stranger. Our daughter, Emily, was standing at the edge of the yard, tears in her eyes, trying to hold it together in front of her cousins and friends, and when Julie turned to her for support, like any mother would instinctively do, Emily took a step back. Not forward. Back. And right then, something shattered inside Julie that not even I had the heart to feel good about. That was the moment she realized the damage wasn't just done to me, it had spilled out onto everyone around her, and no amount of charm, excuses, or crocodile tears could unring that bell. Julie tried to speak. I saw her lips move, her jaw tremble, her eyes dart around for anyone to come to her defense, but no one did. She reached out to me, whispering something I couldn't even hear, and I calmly stepped back and said, "No, sweetheart. You said this is what you needed, remember?" Then I picked up my plate, walked over to the cooler, grabbed a cold beer, and sat by the fire pit like it was just another night. Because for me, it was. The storm had already passed. I had done my crying, my yelling, my late-night spiral through every stage of grief. This was the eye of the hurricane, and I was finally calm. But for her, the real storm was just beginning. And from the look on her face, she knew it. She knew that the moment she stepped off that lawn, she was walking straight into a version of life she had never prepared for, a life without lies, without applause, and without the man who once would have carried her through fire. They say the truth sets you free, but what they don't tell you is that freedom doesn't come wrapped in fireworks or applause. It comes in the quiet moments afterward, when the dust settles and the masks have been ripped off. And the people who once stood tall in your life are suddenly too ashamed to even meet your eyes. In the weeks following the barbecue, my house became quieter than it had ever been, not in a cold, empty kind of way, but in a peaceful, almost sacred sense, like the kind of silence you only hear after a long storm has finally passed. Julie moved out 3 days later, not because I asked her to, but because she knew she couldn't breathe in the ruins she created. I watched her pack, slow and silent, folding blouses into boxes like they were relics from a life she used to respect, and I didn't lift a finger to help. Not out of cruelty, but because I had already carried this marriage on my back for far too long. And as she rolled her final suitcase to the door, she stopped and looked at me, searching for something in my face. Maybe forgiveness, maybe some flicker of the man who would have fought for her once. But all I gave her was a nod and the words, "Take care of yourself." What followed wasn't chaos or drama, like the kind you see in movies. It was cleaner, colder, like justice being executed with surgical precision. My lawyer had already seen the footage. Between the cheating, the documentation, and the date-stamped receipts, I walked away from the divorce with the house, the savings, and every last piece of my dignity intact. She got her car, her apartment, and a new life built on the foundation of lies she used to tear ours down. But karma, as they say, has a long memory. Her new man, the gym rat with the Instagram ego, he didn't last a month once the reality of dating a disgraced ex-wife hit him square in the face. I heard through a friend that he ghosted her after his job threatened to fire him over the inappropriate workplace relationship she swore was casual. As for her job, gone. Turns out, when a married woman's affair becomes public knowledge and her reputation leaks across town like oil on pavement, folks start reconsidering how trustworthy she really is with their clients and books. Her phone went silent. Her social media disappeared. And Julie, Once the queen of backyard brunches and charity galas, became a shadow, ducking into grocery stores with her head down, no ring, no partner, and no one left to clap for her anymore. And here's the twist no one saw coming. I didn't feel good about any of it. Not in the way you might think. There was no champagne toast, no victory lap, just peace. Pure, unshakable peace. The kind that only comes when you finally stop begging people to value you and start valuing yourself. I slept through the night for the first time in over a year. I drank my coffee on the porch without feeling like I was about to choke on the lies in the air. I picked up the guitar I hadn't touched since my dad died and started writing songs again. Not for anyone else, just for me. My daughter came around more. Her hugs felt tighter. Her, "I love you, Dad," came without prompting. And as I stood one evening looking out across the yard where it all fell apart, I realized something strange. I wasn't mourning a failed marriage. I was celebrating an overdue rebirth. Julie didn't just lose a husband that night. She lost the only man who ever would have stood by her through hell. And me? I finally walked out of the fire, clean, whole, and ready for whatever came next. Sometimes, the most powerful revenge isn't loud or cruel or carved into legal papers. Sometimes, it's quiet and patient, like a tree growing back after a wildfire, stronger than it ever was before. A full year passed after the divorce, and I can honestly say, without bitterness or drama, that I became someone I barely recognized. Not because I changed to escape what happened, but because I healed into the man I should have been all along. I sold off a few of the old contracting accounts that kept me chained to places I didn't care about, bought myself a modest little cabin by a lake about an hour out of town, and for the first time in 25 years, I slept with the windows open and the doors unlocked, because nothing, and no one, was breaking into my peace ever again. My mornings were slow, my coffee tasted better, and the silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. That's the part they don't talk about. How peace after betrayal doesn't come from moving on with someone new, but from finally looking in the mirror and seeing a man who kept his integrity while the world tried to tear it from his hands. I started fixing things again, not just broken fences or loose tiles, but things inside me that had been neglected far longer than the house ever was. I volunteered with a group that builds handicap ramps for veterans in the area. I even started teaching a beginner's carpentry class at the community center on Thursdays, where I met folks who didn't know my name was attached to scandal, who just saw me as someone willing to show up and help. And one night, maybe 7 or 8 months after the divorce papers were sealed, I got a text. From her. Julie. Just 3 words. "I miss you." I stared at that message for a full minute, not because I was tempted to reply, but because I realized how free I was in that moment. There was no rage, no desire to hurt her back, no old part of me screaming for closure, just calm and a quiet kind of sadness for the woman she used to be. I didn't answer. I didn't block her. I just let the message sit there, untouched and irrelevant, like a closed book gathering dust in a room I no longer enter. If you've made it this far, and I mean really made it, not just to the end of this story, but to the end of your own, you'll know that there is life on the other side of heartbreak. Not the kind of life people promise you in pep talks or self-help books, but real, earned life, the kind that only comes after you've walked through fire and refused to let it harden you. I didn't get revenge in the traditional sense. I didn't ruin her reputation, chase down every man she ever touched, or waste years of my life chasing apologies from someone who didn't value me. No. What I did was so much worse for her, and so much better for me. I let go. And in doing so, I rose from the ashes of a life I thought I needed, and started building the one I actually deserved.